come down by diminished third to the leading tone. So that's exactly what should happen. I'm going to change this into a standard N6 in a second. The problem up here, as it currently stands, does everyone know what a direct fifth is?
Yeah, it's a direct.
We have a direct fifth. A direct fifth is when the soprano and bass move in the same direction to a fifth or an octave, and the soprano moves by a leap. This is a direct fifth. When the soprano and the bass move in the same direction to a fifth or an octave, and the soprano has moved by a leap, we call that a direct fifth. And that's what technically is occurring here. So, two possibilities. One thing I can do with this voicing is actually let the soprano get up to the B to avoid the direct fifth and drop the tenor down to the F sharp. Okay? That's one thing that I can do. Another thing that we could do is resolve to 5/7 and let that hang. Now, if this was a standard N6, here would be our A here, there would be our C natural. Our bass would have come up by a step. And what you want to do is resolve everything down against it. Okay? Now, that is not a direct fifth, because the bass and the soprano come in different directions. Okay? That's the standard resolution of the Neapolitan sixth. Move everything down against the rising bass. If you move to a 5/7 instead of a 5, leave the common tone and drop the fifth of the one chord. That's how it will work. So a little tricky in the voicing, but you know, the same idea. And again, you want to look for those things. Okay, line 2, go. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay, how many folks think they have the first one, at least? How many folks think they have the second one figured out? The hands have diminished quickly. Third one? All right, maybe let's take a look and let's talk through them. Okay. So on all of these chords, what's the first thing that we should do? Identify. Identify them. Identify them with a name. Right? Spell it out. Identify them out. Right? Otherwise, you're well, an old adage about a creek. So the first one, spelled out as a tertian sonority, is what? F sharp, A, C, E, right? So, what do we have? What is, what's the most likely chord? Does that, first of all, does that fit in the key of D? No. Okay. All right. No. Right. So, it's F sharp half diminished. Within the local key area, what's the most likely thing that it is? 7 half diminished 6/5. Right. 7, and again, maybe a little odd that it's a half, but right of everything around it, that's what would seem to be the most logical scenario. 7. Down here, 4. Okay, so how are we going to resolve that? I agree.
F sharp goes to.
Okay, so maybe we'll do that first. We've got an F sharp moving to G. There's a local leading tone moving up. Now, intervoice leading tone certainly could move down, but in this case, local leading tone, it's the altered tone. Probably want to see that resolve upwards, so we'll deal with that.
7 drops down, so D goes to D.
All right, we'd like to see the 7th of the chord drop downward by sep to the D. Now, one thing we might want to see before we get to the AG, this can be different from time to time in a diminished chord. However, in general, we like to see those tritones resolved in opposite direction by half step. So that C sharp, that F sharp and C resolving oppositely and outwardly. From that point, what might we want to do with this A? And Michael had said to bring it down to a G. Lisa disagrees. Why? Parallel fifths, right? So instead, I could come up to the I could come up to the 1/6. Excuse me, the 4/6. To the 4/6. Now, were this a fully diminished, that could be different, right? If this was an E flat, it's not uncommon. It's not impossible to see the diminished fifth move downward into the perfect fifth. Okay, coming out of this. Okay, quite common actually to see the perfect fifth move down into a diminished fifth, like if it's a 1 moving down into a 5/7. But here, coming out of the 7, we could see that. But certainly, if it's a perfect fifth into a perfect fifth, we want to avoid that. So that's why we would bring this up to a 4/6. Okay. The next one. How many people think they have this? Okay. Someone who doesn't have it. Do I want to say something? Although, Arad, you think you have it? What is it?
542.
Good. 542 of Neapolitan. That is absolutely correct. It's nice to hear some different voices today. All right, so the 542 of Neapolitan. Again, if we look at this in tertian terms, if I spell it out, I've got E flat, G, B flat, D flat. Okay, that certainly is not in G major. Right, almost everything is altered. So again, if the game is to try to think of the most likely possibility, what I've got to think about is, well, you know, this chord seems like it's functioning as what we know as a dominant 7. The only place a dominant 7 is naturally formed is on the 5th scale degree of a major key. So I'm going to look at this and say, okay, well that would be an A flat. Does A flat hold any relevance to G? Yes, of the Neapolitan chord. So now how am I going to resolve it? What am I going to do with the D flat in the bass? Move it to C. That's the 7th of the chord, so I'm going to move it downward. And nicely set up here, we will tend to move. Oops, oh my gosh. We'll tend to have these Neapolitans in first inversion. Right? So that's kind of nicely set up for us. And again, that's the 7th of the chord. And I want to see that 7th of the chord resolved. What else might I want to do here? Okay. Keep the common tone. If I can keep the common tone, that will tend to make sense.
Bring the G up to
We bring this G up. There's our local leading tone, right? So bring that up to an A flat. And what do I want to do with my remaining voice?
double C.
Yeah, why might I want to double the C instead of doubling the A flat?
A flat.
Or maybe not why might, why would I?
You have all the resolving later. Grab
Where's my? Yeah, it's probably going to become a mess to resolve it if we double that A flat. As a general rule, don't double things that are altered. Right? If it doesn't fit in the key, that's probably not the one you want to have two of. That's pretty general, right? Because usually those are the things that are going to have some stipulation about where they would expect to move to. All right. In this case, if we're going to resolve that Neapolitan 6th, again, what I'm going to do, if I change this whole chord to the quarter note here, okay, that N6 is going to come up to now the D natural, right? And everything else is going to come down against it. The most important thing, that A flat, the flat 2, is going to come down by diminished third. I'm going to bring this down to the D. And again, if I leave it to a 5/7, I'll let that C remain. If I'm going to bring it to a straight 5, I'll bring this to the A natural. Okay? So that would move on. The third chord, who thinks they have it? Brendan, what do you got?
I thought it was an Italian 6 of 5.
An Italian 6 of 5. You are correct, sir. Okay, now, so first of all, one thing that we can see is like, okay, it's an Italian 6 chord. How can I see it's an Italian 6 chord? Well, I have an augmented 6 in it. I have the A flat to the F sharp. If you've got an augmented 6, chances are it's some kind of augmented 6 chord. Now from there, I'm going to see I have 2 C's doubled. Right, and that's going to be our Italian form. It looks like what would be a 4 chord with a raised root. Now, why is it not just Italian? Well, what is Italian? Italian 6 is a predominant chord, and it's a chromatic alteration of the 4/6 chord. Right? If I come over here and I take off the F sharp, I've got an F minor triad. Now, it's not a chromatic alteration of the 1, it's a chromatic alteration of the 4, moving to 5. So this is not the Italian 6 of F minor. Instead, it's the Italian 6 of the 5 chord. Again, how do I know that? Well, let's see. Here's the trick. Italian 6 of 5. Where is it going to resolve to? That's on the page. So nothing else could be right. Where would an Italian 6 of 5 resolve to? Would it go to 5? Italian 6 of 5 should move to 5, right? The Italian 6 is predominant. So the Italian 6 of 5 should move to the 5 of 5. Okay? Well, I'm just being mean tonight. Right? So how are we going to do this? One thing we can think about, again, remember that in an Italian 6 chord, or in any augmented 6 chord, the interval that's forming the augmented 6 exists a half step above and below the double root of 5. So that A flat would open out to a G, and that F sharp would open out to a G. Right? There's going to be my double root of what the 5 would be. If I look around here, well, that's the 5 of the 5 chord. Okay? Now, if I'm dealing with an Italian, what's going to happen is one of those doubled C's right now is going to open up to the D, and one of them will move downward to the B natural to make this 505. And of course, that would then resolve onward to 5. If, my friends, you ever would like to resolve an augmented 6 chord to a dominant 7th instead of a triad, and I want to go to 5/7, what do I do? What's going to change?
That F sharp.
The F sharp is going to become an F natural. Okay. Basically, what's going to happen is, if you ever want to look at this as a chromatically altered predominant, anytime you have a chromatic altered predominant that is going to move to a dominant 7 instead of a triad, the note that was the local leading tone that would have gone up by a half step will come down by a half step to become the 7th of the following chord. For instance, I'm going to put us in A minor. I don't know why. And we want we're going to have the 5/7 of 5 in A minor, okay, which is going to be a B dominant 7th chord. So let's say I'm like this, okay, and normally that's going to resolve out to the 5. So I'm going to have, here's my 7th of the chord, that's going to resolve down to the G sharp. Maybe this is going to come up. Actually, I'm going to bring this down. Inner voice leading tone, I'm going to bring down to the B. Then I'm going to go like that, and then I would bring this out to my A, right? This. Local leading tone coming up. Actually, leading tone key, and there I come to my A. Now, if instead of coming to this 5 root position 5 chord like this, if I wanted to turn this into 5/7, I would take that local leading tone of the D sharp, instead of bringing up the half step to the root of the E, I would bring it down the half step to become the 7th. Okay. You'll see this happen even sometimes in like, we'll go G major for a second. And if I have five, 6, 5, and 5 in G major, okay, and rather than taking it to just a 5, which would normally go like this, right, and then I move on. If I wanted to, sometimes you'll see that 5, 6, 5 actually turn into the 5, 4, 2. So that's an example of the time where you'd see a local leading tone and an outer voice actually coming down by chromatic half step rather than going back up. The 5, 6, 5, and 5 turning into 5, 4, 2, and then that would of course carry us down into the 1, 6, and so on, so on, and so forth. Okay, and it would just come down that way, and that's what's going to happen. Same thing here. If you ever called on to turn an augmented 6 into a 5/7, just take that augmented 6, that tone above the bass. Rather than going up by the half step, just come down to the half step to form the 7th above the double groove 5. Okay. Let's look at the next couple together. So, let's do these one at a time. Take a minute and just work on the next one. Now I've given you no key. So, what you have to do now, identify the chord, right? Name it. And then of the 2 possible keys, which one is it more likely in? And then we'll resolve. What chord do we have? Somebody identify the chord. That's an easy part. It's a C major, right? Okay, so Now, our two choices, we have a C major triad. Our two choices of key signature are B major or G sharp minor. Okay. So, of B major and G sharp minor, which one is more likely to see a C major? B major, right? Because in B major, a C major would be the Neapolitan flat 2, a very possible chord. In G sharp minor, C major would be an harmonic spelling of sharp 3 major. Right? Or flat 4 major, right? It just doesn't make any sense. The flat 2 makes more sense. Now, again, the tricky part is we have a root position. And perhaps the trickiest part of this root position is that we have doubled one of the altered tones, which I just told you not to do because it causes problems when you resolve it. But that's what was given to us. Right? So let's see if we can figure out a way that we could get this to work somehow. Okay? Let's see if we can get it. What do you think? What might you do? It's kind of this is a very difficult example. If you bring the bass up to a D sharp, what have you created?
Oh, an augmented second.
An augmented second. So we don't love that. So maybe we want to bring it down to the B. Anything's going to be augmented from there, right? Okay. There's maybe one other option that we could potentially have. What am I doing? We're not coming down to B. That would be the 1. We've got to go to 5. So where are we going to bring it? Come up to the 5, 6, 4. How did we see it dealt with in the etudes, in the Chopin etudes? We saw it in 2 different etudes. We saw it in the C minor prelude, not the etudes, the preludes. We saw it in the C minor prelude. Maybe we saw it in one of the mazurkas, the A minor mazurka. We definitely saw it in the C minor prelude. He just went to a root position. And he deals with the tritone is there. He just deals with it. He just goes straight for the tritone. Boom.
So the tritone is better than the augmented.
Well, this downward is actually a diminished fifth. And we will see diminished intervals. So now there's times where he just does it too. But it's currently working as a diminished fifth, so it's diminished is better than augmented, always. Diminished is actually okay. What might you do with the rest of it? What might I want to do with this C? What if I was in a Neapolitan 6?